Welcome, everybody. My name's Liz Potter. I'm the director at Phoenicia Library, and you're here with Evan Pritchard and his lecture on Phoenicia's Ancient Past, Part 2, The Mountain Lion in Winter. Mr. Pritchard has written 4 books on Native Americans, Native New Yorkers, and No Word for Time about the Algonquin, Bird Medicine, the Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism, which actually has been furiously checked out at our library recently, Henry Hudson, and the Algonquin. All these are available at the Phoenicia Library and also through your local Mid-Hudson library. Mr. Pritchard is a descendant of Micmac peoples and has taught Native American Studies at Pace, Vassar, and Marist. He is the director of the Center for Algonquin Culture. We are so lucky to have you. I just want to, before you take it away, just mention some Zoom housekeeping. We are recording, so your image and your name will appear on the recording, and we will upload it to YouTube, so it will be part of the public domain. If you feel uncomfortable with that, then you should block your name and your image. Participants are muted right now, and please ask your questions in chat. Mr. Pritchard is going to speak in 2 sections. He's got his first part, and then we're going to take about 10 minutes of questions, and then he's got his second part. And then towards the end, say around 8:30 or so, we can unmute and just have a relaxed conversation until 9 o'clock. Please enjoy. If you have to leave early, it's okay. There'll be a natural break around 8:30, but if something comes up, it's okay. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Well, I'm still Evan Pritchard, and it's great to come back to correct my mistakes and add to things I forgot. Can you all hear me well? Is it good sound? Okay, good. All right. Well, just like before, I'm talking about winter, but I'm going to start out with the geography of the Phoenicia area that you didn't know, or maybe you knew something about. But it's really interesting, and so I'm really excited about sharing some of the native geography and more, to build on last time, which I found very enjoyable. So I've been doing some more digging, and you'll find out why I'm talking about, the mountain lions. So I'm going to do a share screen here and go right into this, right to this slideshow. Okay, so you may recognize this fellow who's been there a million years, covered with snow, and they say there's snow coming again, so it's good to prepare yourself. And last time, I talked a little bit about how to survive in the winter, like the Munsee, like the Sopus Munsee, Delaware, and then it got really serious after that, and we had some real winter. At least where I am in the Rosendale area, we had quite a natural disaster. So I got to use all this stuff and learned a lot more. And I'm always humble before winter. Everyone should always be humble before winter. And so I guess I kind of was, because I'm still here. Anyway, I hope this is fun and interesting. So I'll start with Phoenicia's Ancient Past, part 2 of the Mountain Lion in Winter. You'll understand later. But I had a correction from The Simpsons. If it is true, 1851 was the first post office, and it was James Simpson that suggested the town be named after the tannery, one of which was called the Phoenix, as that was the tannery where everyone dropped off their packages and picked up packages from the postal service. So they thought of it as like the post office. There was the one called the Phoenix, which was the main one. And James, called it the Phoenix. He was probably the one who named it, but it's important there was already, he suggested when it came the time to start a real post office with a real town name, he suggested the Phoenix. However, there was already a Phoenix, New York in Oswego County. And a fellow, and I don't remember his first name, but he was one of the descendants. He said it was the US Post Office that suggested that instead of Phoenix, they name it Phoenicia. And I think that this is, I have my beefs about the Postal Service once in a while, and so do others. Writers often do. And Madeline L'Engle, who was a friend of mine, called it the US Postal Disservice. But she was, not an angry tempered woman exactly, but she was fiery. And she had her moments. So it was the US Postal Disservice. But this time they were absolutely brilliant beyond belief and showed a great deal of scholarship and wit, naming it the town Phoenicia. And it was accepted, of course. And see, according to numerous sources, the land of Phoenicia was founded by a Greek god named Phoenix, an actual humanistic kind of demigod. And I think it's ironic because just as the land of Phoenicia, where some of you live, was founded by the Phoenix tannery, so Phoenicia was founded by Phoenix the god. And I don't think that makes us gods, but it's kind of cool. Now, I just mentioned as before, there was this kind of Phoenicia stone that surfaced about that time with Phoenician letters carved in it. I don't have anything to add to that, but maybe if we do a third lecture, I'll find some of that data. But they said the incisions were not new and were at least 100 years old. This is from the lab scientists, whatever. I did see photos and the characters did look Phoenician, but it's a very strange thing. And so it was about that time, 1773, about, however, not 100 years, but 80 years before, they had actually found this first Phoenician stone in Sardinia. A little strange. Okay, so I'm gonna have to adjust that. Okay, now you probably heard about the phoenix bird arising from the ashes, right? I think everybody knows that story. Symbolic of the Phoenician army, capable of rising again after their defeat in the Punic Wars, and there was another war there. And the colors reference Phoenicia's dyes. Phoenicia was very famous for their dyes. And there is some kind of parallel between dyes and tanning, but I'm not sure how to word it. Maybe somebody knows how to express the similarity, because when you tan, there's a certain amount of color change, but it's not the only purpose. And of course, they invented the phonetic alphabet, which made the Phoenician library possible. So without that, you wouldn't have any of those books in that library. Now, here's the next thing. Many people have noted a parallel between the phoenix bird in the Greek myths and the Native American Thunderbird. In many of the Thunderbird stories, the bird is destroyed by fire and then rises from the ashes. And that's the story, that's the version of the Thunderbird story I heard for years. But that may be a post-contact story. I don't think anybody can be sure. But the version I heard is an Anishinaabe story, because I was adopted into the Anishinaabe. A young and virtuous man tries to stand up to a group of bullies in his village. And they, I won't make any jokes about the Ukraine. I'm going to really hold my tongue here, because it's not funny. They tie him to a tree and they burn the tree down and they turn him into ashes. And this powerful Thunderbird rises up from the ashes and chases off the bullies. And so and it sticks around and it comes back every once in a while. There are many Thunderbird stories throughout North America. So it's a North American phenomenon. Now, this is a recent painting of the Thunderbird, supernatural being, usually enormous, symbol of power and strength, and protected humans from evil spirits. The flapping of its wings sounded like thunder, lightning which would have shot out of its eyes and brought rain and storms. And that could be good or bad. You see, there's teachings about the Missingwe teachings are about that things necessarily aren't good or bad. They're often a mixture. Well, the good is when the rain was needed, but bad when the rain came with destructive winds. And as far as the lightning, of course, we say in Algonquin stories, the snow is good because then you can track the animals easier. So there's a good side of snow, and that if you're a hunter, you can see the tracks more clearly. And the bad is if there's too much snow, then you might be, trapped in your house. That's just what happened to me. The bird was said to be so large, they tell it of picking up a whale. I've heard other animals that it picks up, but bright and colorful feathers, sharp teeth and claws. The bright and colorful feathers is a lot like the phoenix. Live in the clouds above the tallest mountains. Now, there's many Algonquin and other nations who honor the Thunderbird, especially the Sioux. The Gros Ventre tradition, it was the Thunderbird who gave the sacred pipe to the people. And of course, that stands and coexists with the story about white buffalo cattlemen who also brought the pipe to the people. But the pipe, if you look at it carefully, the story we tell, or the Sioux tell, Lakota tell, that she didn't bring the very first pipe. She brought the first sacred pipe. So it's a big difference. So this may be the same story. Plains tribes, including the Arapaho, who are all Algonquin speakers, associate them, Thunderbirds, with the summer season. That seems to be true in my experience. The white owl represents the winter. That's also true. So that makes some sense to me there in terms of the Arapaho. Now, so we're mainly talking about winter, but the Thunderbird relates to Phoenicia through the Phoenix. In Algonquian mythology, the Thunderbird controls the upper world, while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther, the great horned serpent. One of his names is Willie Weemock, which probably half of you know by the river and the lake and the park and the hotel. And that's the whole thing I talked about a little bit last month, I think. But Willie Weemock is the great horned serpent, and he's a reptilian. And in the story of the, Willie Weemock story, there's a girl he falls in love with, and the Thunderbirds protect her by zapping Willie Weemock and throwing lightning at him when he's off guard. And according to the legend, the Thunderbirds were ancestors of the human race and helped to create the universe. And actually, I don't write for Ancient Aliens. They've asked me to write for them. I said, no, let me keep my reputation. But there's a lot of really true things in there. And there's a myth they tell, this was like last week, talking about this very thing. And I said, well, that's, the Algonquins believe that too. They talk about the reptilians versus the Pleiadians. And the Pleiadians are associated with the Thunderbirds, and the reptilians associated with the, some of the other, the reptilians. Orion. The Menominee of Wisconsin talk about a mountain that floats in the western sky, up which the Thunderbirds live. From there, they control the rain. Now, it's similar to stories about Hunter Mountain, which is very close to us, that Hunter Mountain has said that there's various deities and Manitous who live on the top of that great mountain, and also the Thunderbirds there too, and controlling the rain. They also control the snow from Hunter Mountain. And now these are the enemies of the great horned snakes called the Misikanabic, which they fight with to prevent them from overrunning the earth and devouring mankind. Again, no Ukraine jokes. They are said to be messengers of the great sun himself and delight in deeds of greatness. And this also resonates with other Algonquin stories, in preventing, doing battle with evil beings. And, sage and sweetgrass, burning them all helps to defeat these beings. And so, yeah, there's the sun is considered to be very, very honorable. And we always do a lot of ceremony, not to worship the sun, but to thank the sun. And so if one is a messenger of the sun, that's a really positive thing. So the Ojibwe version is similar. The Thunderbirds fight underwater spirits, such as Willie Weemock. Their traditions say the Thunderbird is responsible for punishing humans who break moral rules. They said the bird was created by Nanabozo, a high spirit, a cultural hero. He has many names, and similar to Gluskop in the Mi'kmaq. And that the birds live in 4 directions and migrated to Ojibwe lands during the spring with other birds. Now, I have my book, Bird Medicine, is based on this, and the first 4 chapters correspond with the 4 directions And the four gatekeepers of the birds who are called the four gatekeepers are the eagle in the north, hawk in the east, crow in the south, and owl in the west. So all that really corresponds with what I've been writing about. They stay until the fall, when the most dangerous season for the underwater spirits is past, at which time they migrate south with the birds. The Winnebago, who always have something interesting to say, said a man who has a vision of a thunderbird during a solitary fast will become a war chief. And by the way, that's what happened. You know who? Sitting Bull. By the way, if you read Fabulous, The Lance and the Shield, I think it's called, his biography by Utney, fabulous book. And it talks about how he had a vision of a thunderbird, and then that led him to become a war chief, and also gave him psychic abilities, and he could communicate with birds and whatnot after that. They also believe the Thunderbird has the power to grant people great abilities. Well, again, that's what happened to Sitting Bull, that he had remarkable abilities, including the power of song. He wrote 200 songs, which are still popular today among the Lakota, and that's considered a great gift. And he got the power of song from the birds, which makes perfect sense. And the Winnebago are very closely related to the Lakota. The Thunderbird of the Sioux people, again, that word is kind of troublesome, but Siouxian speaking people, how's that? Was a noble creature that protected humans from the Tehila, who were dangerous reptilian monsters. Again, it's the same story. And according to global myths, these dangerous reptilian monsters associated with creatures from Orion, whereas the Pleiades are, I would say, the good guys, very highly respected by in Algonquin mythology. Some believe they were shapeshifters who often changed their appearance to interact with people, and that's what Willie Weemock does in the story. There's a book called The Girl Who Befriended the Thunder Beings, and I think Joe Brishak edited that, and it's as good as any version that I have. I tell that story a lot, but he shapeshifts back and forth between a person and a kind of reptilian, and that's how the Thunderbird zap him. So the Shawnee, they appeared as boys, could be identified by their tendency to speak backwards. And this is all has to do with the Heyoka, or coyote medicine. Is doing things backwards, not just speaking, but actually moving backwards, doing everything backwards. And I've actually worked with some Heyoka teachers, and it's pretty interesting, I have to say. Been very powerful teachers. They say mythology began with the mound builders. The mound builders may have been, I think it's not fair to say the story just originated with the mound builders, but it may be the earliest proven connection, because I think this goes back way before the mound builders. So only go back, they're not like newcomers, they only go back to 4,000 or 5,000 BC, and Algonquins go back much longer. Through history, the Thunderbird symbol has appeared on totem poles, pottery, and petroglyphs, mass jewelry, and carvings, told through songs and stories. Well, that's true. So that relates to the Phoenix, as many people know the Phoenix version of the Thunderbird. Now, the word totem, like in the totem pole, comes from the Algonquin word for a clan, which is Dodem. And if we go back a little bit, you see each of these. I did some study of this when I was teaching at Vassar, did some, studying of like identifying totem poles, and you kind of practice and you get good. This one's pretty simple. It's like the Thunderbird, you see by the crown, but then they usually have 4 levels, to at least 3 or 4 levels, and each one is like a stylized animal head. Oh gosh, I did something wrong here. 1 minute. Okay, I did it again. Okay, so in terms of what Algonquins do, this is my map of Algonquin settlements in North America, and traditional ones. And notice they're mostly north of the Potomac and the Ohio River. And the Munsee language of our area is one of dozens of Algonquian languages. There are at least 36 Algonquian languages identified by anthropologists, but they're spread among 84 nations. And so you might think there's 84 languages. In fact, some of them are too similar. It's very subjective. And they're all part of the Algonquin civilization, which we would call Kichi Atugwoga, the people who wear the skins of the white-tailed deer. And the Munsee were part of this mythological Lenape League, and you see in blue here. And the Midewiwin elders do mention, if you ask them directly, that there's this Lenape lodge in the Midewiwin, but they don't really talk about it in detail. It's very the whole Lenape League is like there's no contemporary historical evidence from the 1700s. Okay, now the name Shandaken, this is a sort of a repeat and sort of not. So in Zeisberger's Lenape Dictionary, 1776, this word means a place of many spruce, but he really probably means hemlock. But the word Ashin could mean evergreen and cover both. And there is a spruce mountain and a hemlock mountain in the Shandaken Township, which is near Slide Mountain. And they are both forever green. So explorers more recent than Zeisberger have gotten confused between the hemlock and the spruce. They look almost the same from a distance. And according to Michael Kudish, who is occasionally one of our members of the audience, an earlier surveyor in Grand Gorge reported spruce when he must have meant hemlock. There is no spruce around Grand Gorge today, nor does fossil evidence in peat bog show any of these at any times. No spruce, but people have mistaken our hemlocks for spruce. Okay, and again, one of the important things is that Chief Shandaken lived at Pine Orchard near Table Rock, where the Catskill Mountain House was built, near North South Lake, and near Palinville, off 23A, which was a trail. And I told the story last month. Lotowana was killed by a jealous suitor, and after her burial, Shandaken left the Catskills and went elsewhere, presumably to Shandaken, New York. But it's also a common word, so there's this slight ambiguity. But Pine Orchard was famed for its spruce and its hemlock, as well as white pine. So it's okay. So it's likely he didn't have to change his name. Probably felt right at home. And it's a 20-mile hike from Pine Orchard to Phoenicia along what's now Route 214, which is circumstantially a trail. And I've been asked, how do you know it's a trail? Well, because he walked along it. And it's a well-defined path along the Stony Clove. And it also passes by the Devil's Tombstone monolith. And I'm going to mention that. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to move this. This is something I've shown. There's 28 here, and in the middle of the town, 40 meets Stony Clove Road, which is 214, along the creek, and the trail, which was 40. That's that sort of Wittenberg connection. It crosses without a fording, but then it has to ford Stony Clove Creek and heads west towards 28. It seems there was a fording place along the Esopus just upstream near the railroad rapids as an extension of that 40. That Wittenberg Road is an important road. That road continues along Woodland Valley stream, also called Muddy Brook, continues as Woodland Valley Road along the base of the Panther Kill. 2 islands in the Esopus between Phoenicia and Alabama, the largest at a place called Greeny Deep, would have been of great interest to the Esopus Munsee, as these rendezvous or meeting places were generally islands. The abundant hemlocks in the area would have been of interest for the tanning purposes. And now, as I emphasized last time, there are 7 sacred springs that give birth to 7 rivers, and they're major. And in our culture, the source of headwaters is a sacred place. And the expression "water is life," as you say in Lakota Mini Wichoni, we say the same thing. To respect the source is to respect all life. So they make a pilgrimage along their own village stream or something significant to them to the Sweetwater Spring, or the source, as a vision quest, a parallel to the quest for higher truth and for quest for seeing Kishalumokung, he who dreams us into being, who is very distant metaphysically. He lives at the source of light off the 12th level of clouds in the sky. The source waters are known for their incredible purity and are often quite healing to drink from. So there's another parallel in that this going to the light source spiritually in Algonquin spirituality, these lights are very pure and they're very healing, and to drink from that light. So there's a very clear parallel. Shandaken is home to 7 such sweet waters, and that's very unusual. Now I want to talk about trailblazers. This is kind of inspired by a question that Michael Kudish asked, and I think it was a great question. How do they get across all these streams? And nobody ever asked that before, but from experience, I can tell you there's a couple different ways. And it all has to do with trailblazers. You know, you've heard this, you've heard that expression, you know, the trailblazers, and so was a great trailblazer. Well, we needed trailblazers. They were part of the system. Without the trailblazers, the whole thing, the economy would have collapsed. 2 main fording places in the town of Phoenicia alone, one small one at Stony Clove, a larger one, of course, across the Esopus. 2 different kind of streams. The methods are season specific and size specific. Little Stony Clove could have been forded during the summer at what's now Route 40 using stepping stones. Now I want to show you, I'm trying to move this around. Okay, so these are very artificial looking stepping stones, but but really they would just use natural stones and line them up across the creek about this size in a way that you wouldn't necessarily fall unless you were a little unbalanced. And they are maintained by the following travelers. So again, it was a collective kind of response to a need. They didn't have to talk to each other. They all knew they're raised to help maintain these stepping stones. They didn't have to have a frigging meeting. They just all knew what to do. So you're going along and maybe a storm has wiped out some of the stones as you replace them, and the next people benefit. In my wild youth, I forded calm streams 40 feet or more across easily by the use of stepping stones. I also wrote about stepping stones in Nowhere for Time. There's a chapter about that. Nowadays, you rarely see good stepping stones except in the mountains on maintained trails. So some of our stepping stone bridges are often done by rangers, and they usually do a good job. So I asked, has society lost its balance? Well, we'll find out. A well-made series of stepping stones be crossed without getting your moccasins wet. However, after a heavy summer rain, the stream swells and it warbles with energy, and every river has a song, you know, but you may want to remove your moccasins and go barefoot. It's much easier. Then you put them back on and they're dry and your feet dry. And the feet will dry quickly, but your mocks will not. And in spring, hikers are likely to wade across, but if the water's higher than knee deep, they may depend on that skilled trailblazer coming before them, cutting down an old tree, like you see on the upper right here, of finding a large rock and setting it across the stream so that it sits firmly on the rocks. The same trailblazer will assemble some rocks at both ends of the log. You don't see that here, but I've often seen how people will, at the end of a log bridge, which is pretty scary enough, but you put a bunch of stones here to help you get up on it. And it's just considered a courtesy. It's not like, well, you're too wimpy to get up on a log, but it's just nice to have because you're carrying luggage such as a papoose or some kind of backpack. And the same trailblazer will assemble the rocks at the ends, act as a sort of a screen test for those not agile enough to walk across a single log. Now, bare feet and moccasins alike are capable of gripping the bark of the log with the toes so you don't fall. And many a high steel worker has that sense of balance, be they here in Shoshone or Algonquin. They start out practicing on a log bridge, perhaps, and their mothers raised them. I was told by many of the Iroquois steel walkers, their mothers trained them not to be afraid. Much harder to cross the log wearing hard-soled shoes, and harder to count to 20. Some can do it effortlessly, and in winter you would cross the creek in your snowshoes and you would hardly notice the difference. So they wore a lot of snowshoes, a lot of times. I mean, so fording the Esopus, I guess admit that, okay. Fording the Esopus was different. It was very fast and deep, even in summer, and the prehistoric Phoenicia had no inner tubes, of course. Native people preferred to ford rivers above rapids or waterfalls. That's very consistent. I'm not sure why. It was often shallower there and the current more consistent. And mapping out trails, I'm surprised at how often they bend around so as to cross a stream just above a waterfall. The crossing place of the Esopus is at Railroad Rapids, while 28, which we call the Pepacted Trail, or, you know, some people have onto your trail. It continues northwest. The Esopus is crossed by Route 40's extension, continues south into the Woodland Valley. In winter, the Esopus would freeze and crossing was easier. The Esopus Creek, not the people. Okay, I want to make sure you understand. The Esopus Creek would freeze. And the people probably got pretty cold too. Crossing was easier then. In spring, the ice up in the mountains would melt, giving strength to the currents, and most of the Esopus was difficult to cross without a canoe. But again, in a canoe, you can't really go anywhere once you cross. So I imagine the Trailblazers fashions a raft and a pole of some kind, and they leave it at the shoreline for others to use. So rafts were often used, and the pioneers or settlers used them frequently and would build a raft. They didn't last very long, but they'd build it for a single trip. And it's funny, it showed up in that Lincoln special on Sunday, because he made a raft in order to go down the Mississippi. On yet larger rivers like the Hudson, dugouts were certainly left for public use as a do-it-yourself community-run ferries, just like shopping carts in a parking lot today. And they trusted no one would want to steal one. They're terribly heavy and risk getting caught. David de Vries, who wrote in his book Voyages of David de Vries in the very early 1600s, describes finding several dugouts along the lower Delaware in the ice waiting for springtime. Dugouts weigh 2 or 3 tons, so not easily stolen. And if no rafts were available, some would try to brave the rapid currents with their moccasins held high in one hand. You just hold your hand, you put them in your hand, you hold them all the way up above your head, and you just, use your toes to search for a purchase in the slippery stones. But drowning was not uncommon, even among natives. So while we're on the subject, this is my favorite place. I did this Coshecton extravaganza. This is a carving of a dog's head, and it's located at the Pennsylvania side of the Great Coshecton Crossing. And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I discovered this. It's very clear to me that that's what it is. This black Labrador carved with stone tools, and it's low on the west bank of the Delaware, whose retriever nose points at the very best spot to cross. However, it's apparent that if he is underwater, the depth is too high and you're likely to end up underwater too. Further up the Esopus, past Olivera, I'm never sure how to say that, Oliveria, near Winnistone, one would have been more likely to find a stepstone crossing, and that could be summer travel. But I want to show you this. A dog showed up. I was taking photos of this this dog, and there's a whole lot in common. There's the whiskers here, and there's a rough spot here. It's all pot marked here where the whiskers are, and they've got that eyebrow ridge and this very interesting nose, and the curve is the same here if you follow it through. So that's this dog that showed up at the right moment. Now, many petroforms, and that's the generic word for all these things. I know I have to let these people in. Many petroforms have seats. In fact, more than half of them, I'd say, that I've seen have seats, maybe more than half, that show you what to look at when you sit there. The dog's nose is shaped like a bicycle seat. That's coincidental, but it means it's ergonomic, an ideal shape for the human body to sit on. It directs our eyes towards the best crossing point in the river. And there are alluvial cornfields beyond. So this is an important and very dangerous crossing. A lot of people die every year, even now, drowning, because there's a little channel down the middle. But if you follow the dog and you follow the point of the nose, you'll get to the right spot. And then if you can't see him, he can't see you, and you're on your own. That's the teaching. Okay, so following the Stony Clove, some of these might be out of order, but you get to Chichester going up there, and it's very mountainous. The trail follows the stream closely. The Clove is kind of a secret passageway from the Esopus Valley and its watershed into the very different realm of Schoharie Valley, different watershed, and Stony Clove Creek runs through it. As you reach Greene County, you encounter a perplexing monolith that the Dutch called Devil's Tombstone. It does in fact resemble the shape of a tombstone with a peak profile, but it's also the shape colonists identified important to the Algonquins when they called the Manitou Stone or Spirit Stone. So I refer to it as a Manitou marker, just to leave the devil behind me, so to speak. So Alpha Evers said that The Devil's Tombstone was there when the Dutch arrived, made from local stone, set upright on its end, which was a common Algonquin practice, covered with graffiti that goes back to the 1800s. One of my favorite examples of a similar erected stone by the Algonquins was near the mouth of the Harlem River at the path to the waiting place mentioned in Native New Yorkers. The village was called Shorankin, the waiting place of the Great Standing Rock. So they put that standing rock there so they know where to wade, because you can only wade in the one place. The rock was used to mark that best crossing place of a tricky river. That spot is now at the Harlem River Park between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue, but the river bottom has been dredged. As you know, there's a lot of these erected stones. It's not unusual. But they put this plaque on it honoring the highway workers, which is kind of clever. And Native New Yorkers, I quoted Ritchie to support the idea that natives had created ceremonial landscapes 1047 BC using sites aligned on a grid for the solstice and equinox. And one line identified became known as the Montauk-Hammonasset line. And it leads to us from a similar monolith in Montauk, New York on Long Island, right to Devil's Point, Devil's Tombstone, up 214. And that's, I think, 150 miles. And then it continues on to Manitoulin Island and Lake Huron. And then since then, writers like Dr. Curtis Hoffman and Glenn Kreisberg have written about these alignments. Kreisberg used GPS to map out the Montauk-Hammonasset line in his book, Spirits in Stone. And it seems to align with the uppermost tip of this stone slab, like precisely to a few inches. Alf Everett said it was there when the Dutch arrived. It's a good local stone geologically and not an uncommon thing. But what's funny is this plaque, I keep moving this, but this plaque here honors the highway workers who paved 214. Now that's really not something you need a monument for, but it's very clever because it's a way of placing the stone under state protection because people want to, you know, do stuff to it. Now this is the Devil's Tombstone, Montauk to Devil's Tombstone alignment using GPS. And that's exactly the spot. There's 214, there's the Devil's Tombstone. Here's the monument at the Montauk at Fort Lake Pond. And all along this line are all kinds of monoliths, sculptures, and effigy stones. And they're all fascinating. And, you know, I guess I've induced a lot of otherwise good men to spend their lives running around the woods looking at these things. Anyway, they're 150 miles apart and very accurately aligned. So maybe could have been done without an astrolabe by observing the solstices very carefully. But you know, it's just amazing all the same. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these petriforms and stone chambers and everything you can imagine. And here I put it in this map. This is my mapping Manhattanwack map. And I have a book called Mapping Manhattanwack that's based on the map. And I also have Mapping Native New York, which has a whole large section about Shandaken. But anyway, here's that line again. You see, so then we'll look at the close-up. I'm gonna, so I wrote about a grid of solstice alignments on Long Island in these mortuary cities, and it was based on William Ritchie's handbook. And then there's a longer version with theories how it got started and how it could have been laid out by line of sight, starting at Fort Hill Pond. But what happened was the editor of Native New Yorkers was struggling with the length of it, which was already, it was 1,000 pages. And he said it should be 500 pages. I said, how do you do that? He said, just cut out every other word. Well, that's what we did. So, but what remained was a kind of a tease about these alignments, and it ignited the curiosity of many antiquarians, and countless studies were done all the way to Manitoulin Island in Ontario. And that Montauk line has turned out to be very fruitful in terms of petriforms. And this, almost in Phoenicia, just past Chestnut, there's this, you know, that Devil's Tombstone is part of that. So I want to mention that. As I mentioned last time, Shandaken is a land of sacred waters, and there's 7 major streams that come out of springs and have their sources in Shandaken Township area, which is very large. Randout Creek, Esopus Creek, Neversink Creek, Woodland Valley Creek, Panther Kill, Bushnellsville Kill, and Birch Creek. So I'm not going to read all that because I read it last time, but I made this new map so you can see it more dramatically. Here's the 7 sacred springs in Shandaken, and the X's are springs, are sweet water springs that give rise to major rivers right within this whole Shandaken area. So where to begin? Well, okay, Panther Mountain, very interesting. Here's the source of Woodland Creek. And then here's, this is called the Panther Kill. Of course, it has its source on Panther Mountain. And within Shandaken, you have the Bushnellsville Kill. Probably you could say starts in, this Rose Mountain, but also over here, there's an interesting passage right to the ridge to Angle Creek. This is Birch has its source in Shandaken, right at the edge near High Mount. The Esopus Creek goes all the way around, has its source right here next to this fish pond, the Fish Pound Pond, or Winnisook Pond. And the Neversink comes this way, right by it from Slide Mountain to Neversink, which is a major river. And the Rondout Creek starts here, and that's one of the major rivers in New York. And that and the Esopus are both in the 50+ mile category. So there's a New Creek. But I want to show you this, pretty cool. This is the circle. The Great Circle is the wellspring of creation. Okay, so Panther Mountain is here, and there's a circle of water all around it. That's very interesting, the Great Circle. Very mystical significance. And here's Phoenicia right here. According to Zena Halpern's book, The Templar Mission, on page 228, she mentions Panther Mountain, calling it the Lenape place of the well springs of creation. So that should raise everybody's self-esteem if you're associated with Panther Mountain. And thank you to Muncie descendant Robin Hill Chandler for that quote. This epithet combines their knowledge of the various rivers that have their well springs of origins either on or near Panther Mountain, plus their knowledge of the ancientness of this mountain and the biblical cataclysm that formed it millions of years ago. Now, science has recently confirmed that Panther Mountain, the 18th tallest of the high Catskill peaks, which is nothing to sneeze at 3720, was shaped 375 million years ago by a meteor a half-mile across that bashed into the earth and created a hole 2,670 feet deep. I will torture you with these numbers just because they're pretty impressive. Fortunately, no one was around at the time. Of course, it must have been creating a thick layer of dust all over the valley. But pre-contact Esopus Muncie recognized the circular base of the mountain as the footprint of a meteor, and maybe even found parts of the meteor itself. Esopus Creek and Woodland Valley Creek filled the edges of the hole and created a near perfect circle of water around the mountain, making it island-like. Now, this island is 7 miles across, just under 7 miles. So like if you start here and go there, that's about 7 miles, and that's huge. This is it says, it may have been smaller, a hole, half a mile across, but this is very large here. Now, let me show you something I think is cool. The circle, you may know this, widely understood symbol among Native Americans as being sacred, and a symbol for sacredness itself, either in omens or in petroglyphs, and those kind of drawings that are left on rocks, and possibly for creation as a whole, adding to the perception of sacredness in the eyes of all who looked upon this massive peak, and those who planted their moccasins on the giant ledge. And that's the literal specific name of a ledge on Panther Mountain, or slide, giant ledge. Look down to the rivers and streams far below. Now here, I think this is interesting. Okay, we're back. So look at this picture. This is only a mile across, meteor crater at Winslow, Arizona. So Panther Mountain might have started out something like that, but due to different factors, it kind of inverted. And the Great Circle at Panther Mountain is just under 7 miles in diameter, and the crater at Winslow is trying to keep this going here, is less than a mile across. So this is cosmogenesis theory is in its infancy, but recent studies of fallen meteors and meteorites prove beyond a shadow of a doubt they're highly populated with anaerobic viruses from deep space, some of which fall off before impact. And in 1969, near Murchidon, Victoria, Australia, a meteor fell that was studied and found to contain sugars, amino acids, and forms of RNA that are the building blocks of DNA, the building blocks of terrestrial life. So this is from Scientific American. And so this is called the Murchison meteorite. Well, you know, when you look at the oral tradition of the Australians, they knew this all along too. They're always saying, oh yes, these meteors brought life, you know, creation happened with meteors. Micmacs say similar things, and this is what they're finding out. Now here, the belief that meteors are uniquely tied to the creation of life on Earth is millions of years old itself. The relationship is alluded to in the Aboriginal Australian lore, as I said, the Old Testament also, and is central to the Islamic forms of mysticism, because the Kaaba, which is a temple of purity housing the millennium-old meteor that guided Adam and Eve to the spot where they would build the first temple of God, which is now Mecca. So in Islam, this meteor was there to guide Adam and Eve in the beginning of creation, and this is now also how the Lenape see the meteor. The Panther Mountain was the destination of pilgrims following all these rivers to their source, but there were other types of pilgrims, possibly in other pilgrimages. By the way, this is an illustration from 1315 showing Muhammad with the black stone of creation, in other words, the meteorite, putting it in place at the Kaaba, in case you don't believe me. Now, this is really cool stuff. I can't wait to tell you this. Okay, now this is the sign at Emerson. I added what I thought was a nice touch here. Here's a comet, because comets and panthers are considered equivalent. The war panther's Munsee name is Mamindaasi. Mamindaasi. The English word panther can cover a number of subspecies and regional adaptations, such as darkness or light, or albino, or whatever that other words when they have dark adaptations, melanomic. According to zoologist Wes Gillingham, who is in our area, mountain lions and true panthers are the same, and catamount is an antique term for them that has come down to what some early Dutch settlers is now in local vernacular. So James Fenimore Cooper used that to refer to a small panther. The black panthers that one used to see in Florida were actually leopards from Africa and Asia. They escaped from a circus, which was wintering there in the 1930s. And they apparently ran out of money during the Depression, and they let all their animals go because they couldn't feed them. And that became the panther as we think of it in the Okeechobee area. But true panthers have long yellow tails with some individual melanistic mutations. And what happened is some of those were from Asia and Africa, the ones that were escaped, and they started interbreeding with our local kind and then lost some of their color. Like the catamounts that climbed the huge sign of the Emerson Resort and Spa, it is only 2 miles to the east of Panther Mountain. Comet to its base. A comet has a long golden tail as well. So here's the comet with its long golden tail, and here's the catamount with its long golden tail. And so the Munsee saw them as being exactly like, and so the comet and the catamount or panther became somewhat synonymous. When he attacks, we are to imagine that tail streaming out straight behind him. In fact, when he charges across the horizon, it is his golden tail that we see as he drops meteorites from the sky. Some say that war may arise in the direction from which Mamindaasi comes. It had been now a catamount or even a full-size panther, I would have embellished a performance for you worth regarding. That's a quote from James Fenimore Cooper in Last of the Mohicans. So some of this material is ideas and information is from Wes Gillingham, who's a zoologist associated with, I think, several different parks and museums, including Time and the Valley. But anyway, I wanted to clarify about this zoology and the species. So they're all pretty much the same species there. And the Munsee called this the war panther. When the chief Tecumseh was born, a comet passed over his village, certainly a Kige no Wogan, or a prophetic sign. It showed he was blessed by the war panther and would be a great warrior, which he sure as heck was. That is why he was named Tecumseh, which is Shawnee for panther passing across. It was interpreted by his elders that as a comet came from the south, he would never be defeated in battle as long as he was in the south. But defeat came in 1814 at the Thames River Valley, which is far to the north, his fatal battle. It actually was on what was then Munsee territory, the same people as lived in Phoenicia. Some of them went to the Thames River in Ontario, and that's where Tecumseh was hanging out with his bros, the Munsee, and he died in battle. Naturally, it stands to reason that the panther kill is looked upon with great reverence, and that the source of the creek high up on Panther Mountain is even more sacred, maybe than most headwaters. In fact, the Esopus itself flows forth from the earth within the sacred circle. So when the Munsee migrated west and reached the large mountain ranges of Essex County, New Jersey, they named them Catamount Mountains, which means large mountains. Later, when Kittatinny established a college and chose a mascot for their football team, they chose the Mamindaasi, the Munsee War Panther, as their mascot to inspire them to be victorious in war or football. As it is a mountain lion more than a literal panther, the team became known as the Kittatinny Lions, although it was later changed to Cougars, whatever. Around campus, the ambient statuary, it correctly shows the mountain lion or catamount rather than some circus lion as their war god. And here's an actual photo from the campus. And that's what we're talking about. And by the way, according to West Gillingham, when the weather got cold, people started seeing these wildcats in their yard, and they don't usually, hardly ever see them. But I think it was him that told the story that, oh no, it was Tom, my friend Tom saw this. Somebody opened up their barn on a very, very cold morning, and there was this mountain lion outside. And that's the same as the moose. Is when it's really cold, they come south because they don't necessarily like hanging out with lots of people. And so it's more open then in the snow. They tend to come south to see us. So the thing is that this panther is kind of a symbol of creation itself, if you can gather that. And the mountain is, of course, the wellspring of creation, but also the war god. And so maybe think about a creation and destruction symbol, such as with the Misingwe, not just in the kaboom of the life-giving meteor, which crashes into the earth, but also in smaller ways all the time. Apparently, the Munsee attributed life-giving properties to the war panther and probably kept them very secret. Now, Panther Mountain has long been regarded as a sacred spot, not just by Native Americans. Northern Slope is the home of the Menla Retreat Center. That's over here. You see the picture. Largely Buddhist, but which has sponsored a number of memorable Native American events, including a visit by the Kogi of Columbia. Mount Tremper, 2 miles away, is the home of a Zendo, a retreat center of longstanding. Members have often served as activists on behalf of Native Americans. The Big Indian Powwow is viewed on the left. They're gatherings that were held each year for over 2 decades, I think, less than a mile from the foot of the mountain, right on the base of Panther Mountain. Were spiritually inspirational for me. Mary Lou Stapleton, whose mixed Native heritage goes back centuries, was the founder. There are many other spiritual centers and spas, the most famous of which maybe was Rudy's, but the Full Moon Spa on Oliveira Road carried on that tradition. So it's just interesting and not an accident that the spiritual people who are creating these centers know that Panther Mountain is one of the most sacred places in the northeast of North America, but you never read about it, but people know. And so now I'm going to just say it's getting towards 8, and you say, what I'm talking about portages. Here's my map of portages, which includes Phoenicia and the Tupacton Trail. But I also want to show you the new map that I made. So maybe I can, trying to get my, I'm trying to get my picture larger. You can't see me now. Okay, well, you can see this. I just made this map, but you know, we have another portage right, oh, right near us. So this is like the Neversink River here, and this is the Wind Coop, and here is the Rondout. Well, and here, but this is called Chestnut, and there's a little stream that goes along here through the mountains, and there's a passage that was used, and the settlers saw the Native Americans walking along here frequently. And this red line is an actual carrying portage, where you carry your canoe from the end of Chestnut to this Paradise Lake, and then down Windcoop, and then you're in the Neversink Valley. And so that's a whole story that, and I'll forward to that. Okay, here is that portage. So you can see this is the Neversink watershed over here, and here's the carrying place right here, and that takes you to Chestnut, and that river has a trail, and that goes along. That's now 55, and that goes to the Rondout, and then you follow the Rondout through the mountains, and you go this way if you're canoe or whatever, and then you could go all the way up here to Friday Mountain, and it's only 2 miles from here, or 2 miles from here to here, to another body of water that leads you to the Esopus. So you get a chain of portages that, you know, actually is written about. I'll show you this. Okay, so Chestnut Creek runs to the town of Grahamsville as headwaters in the border of Catskill Park. A 1/4 mile to the south of the source of the Chestnut is the Rondout watershed, which is in the Rondout watershed. You find Lake Paradise. You'd have to carry your boat that 1/4 mile, which is not very long. And Lake Paradise is the source of Windcoop Creek, which is in the Neversink watershed. Benton Hollow Road follows the portage route today between the two. And from there, when you go up to Chestnut, you get onto Route 55 and 55A, and you go east, and it follows through a channel in the mountains of sorts. It seems to have been the only available portage route for the divide between the upper Rondout and the Neversink watershed. And it was used as a footpath when the water levels were low, and as a canoe route when the water was high. Regardless, water or land, it was a major travel corridor. And according to local histories, that route, Chestnut Creek, was used by Native Americans to reach the Minisink Trail, which is now 209, when migrating westward during various removals. Also used in the Revolutionary War to march prisoners out of the area. In other words, the Grahamsville area, on foot following the Battle of Chestnut Creek. The Slater Farm was the site of a native settlement, and many hunting camps were there, native ones. Numerous boxes of projectile points have been collected from that site. And a woman named Elise Hombeck was connected to the farm, wrote a letter to Time in the Valley Museum on February 28th, 2010, saying that her father-in-law's grandfather saw Native Americans traveling back and forth on the trail located between the Rondout and 55A, which is also 55. Quote, they were always friendly and would wave as they passed. This patch of road and river is the eastern approach to that 1/4 mile portage mentioned. In a later generation of her family was a Durd Smith. Oh, sorry. I didn't get it. Okay. An Indian scout who married a full-blooded Seneca woman named Mim, close friends with the famous Tunis, after which the lake was named Tunis Lake. But Tunis Lake is also part of the overall portage route that 28 now traces. So I just wanted to include that. So now it's 8 o'clock, and we can open up for a bit of questions. So Liz, you want to help us out?
Yes. Let me just take a look. So don't be shy. I'm going to start with the first question. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, so I'll just ask one question. If there's nothing else, then you have plenty of time to keep going. I just, you know, I had never heard about the 7 sacred springs in Shandaken and this image of the sacred circle around Panther Mountain. And thank you so much for bringing that out. I
Okay.
never realized that. But to bring it into something very practical, as a resident here, have you heard of, in your travels, any stories of how this area, were there forest fires, or more importantly, in this area with these springs, were there times of flooding? Have you ever heard any stories like that? That's
Well,
my
oh,
question.
you mean, I'm not sure what you're saying, like controlled fires or accidental ones? Because I mean, Michael Kudish knows quite a bit about controlled fires, and we
No,
collaborated on that. But you mean
no,
other kinds?
I'm really just thinking like, with stories and that came down, and through the generations. For example, there was, the people who lived on the West Coast, there was kind of this legend of a great disruption, and it turned out they could go back and find out that I don't know, 300 years ago, there was the fault shifted, and there was a big tsunami that cleared out this area. Um,
Mm.
I'm just wondering if there's any stories like that that have been handed down. It sounds like not. Maybe it just.
Well, okay, but a lot of floods today are caused by riparian abuse, and people are building where they shouldn't. And of course, they didn't have that. And also, as I was emphasizing in that part about all the things they did in order to cross streams, even if they were high, they would be kind of set up for high water. But yeah, there was a lot of stories about natives being swept away by, by in the spring, usually by like snow melt-offs when the water would be unusually high. But it was, they kind of knew that was coming though. So, you wouldn't hear as much about it, but there are often stories of people drowning, even, and I'm talking about native people, not just colonists who don't know the rivers. So that's as far as I would go. But
Thank you.
there were no earthquakes. However, the Lenape, if you go to Muncie, often had stories of various kinds about how in the very, 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 very early days there were earthquakes, and that they remember that, and they would appeal to the Misingwe, or the woodland spirits, for mercy, for help. And I don't think I told you the story before, but there was one Muncie story where the medicine men prayed for the earthquakes to stop, and it didn't work at all. So then the elder lady said, well, we need some women. You guys are just not pure enough. So they got the women, and the women prayed to the Misingwe for the earthquakes to stop, but it still didn't work, because even they weren't pure enough. So they got 7 young girls, virgins or whatever, to pray, and they were very pure. What happened was they started rising up in the air, and they were afraid they were going to lose them to the sky. So they asked this elder woman, what do we do? How do we save our children? They're floating up in the sky praying for us, for the earthquakes to stop. And she said, throw dirty laundry at them. I don't think I told you this story before. Anyway, so everybody came and started throwing dirty laundry at the 7 little girls to taint them with the dirtiness of the laundry, and it still didn't work. So they floated up to the sky and became the 7 sisters, the Pleiades. And I know there's only 6, but hey, we're just Native Americans, what do we know? But we always see them as 7 for some reason. But anyway, that's a story about earthquakes. There's a lot of stories mentioning earthquakes, and earthquakes cause floods. So there's part of the answer. It's in the world of mythology.
Okay, next question. Thank you. It's from Janet, and actually kind of a follow-up by Garrett. Janet asked, can you talk about local native place names that are here, such as Esopus? And Garrett Yankus asked, people mispronounce Esopus sometimes, and are there other words that you're hearing people mispronounce that are Native American originally?
Well, I know, I have a map that I don't think I have a copy here, but I have published maps with like all known native place names in Ulster County, so people can write to me, and that's a, you know, you really like, there's a lot of them, and it's all in this one map, Ulster County, and then people can write to me at evan.pritchard7@gmail.com, or go to the website algonquinculture.org. So, you know, I mean, there's just too many. In terms of, yeah, I'm sure there's lots of mispronunciations. But no, Esopus isn't exactly correct, but it's Sipus, you know, Sipus, and it just became standard as Esopus because in Greek mythology there's an Esopus, and so the Dutch would always go to that. And you know, Peak Amus, I like to pronounce it Peak Amus, because that's what it should sound like. A peak is a body of water, and Amus is a small beaver, or, you know, so it's just a slight inflection, Peak Amus, you know. So people say peak a moose like it's some moose peeking through the bushes. So that's just, you know, a couple. But yeah, a lot of them are, I'm sure, it's hard to think of enough examples.
And I have one last question. Philip Oxenstein says, where was the western edge of the Munsee Esopus territory? In my reading, I was under the impression that the western Catskills were a borderland between the Algonquin and the Haudenosaunee,
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 you should,
and that
yes.
and that both hunted in them. Is that not the case? So
No, that's not exactly true. See,
okay.
I found the bill of sale for the Hardenberg patent, and that was signed in 1746. And all the details are on this. It's a bill of sale. It's not a patent. The patent comes first, and then you sell the land. Natives sell the land, and that was in 1746. And it's very specific. And it's the Esopus Munsee on the east and the Minisink Munsee on the west claimed that and sold that land all the way to the what they call the Mohawkinsink, which tells you who was living there, the Haudenosaunee, and that's the western branch of the Delaware. Now there was a strip of land. I can have a map of this to show people, but there's a strip of land not very wide between that that main branch of the Delaware and this Mohawkinsink, and then beyond that is Susquehanna. Beyond the Susquehanna, that's definitely where the Munsee were sent to be out of danger, but it was the Iroquois and Haudenosaunee land at that time. So there is a kind of a strip between the Mohawkinsink, or the main Delaware, that cuts across, and, you know, and the Munsee, the Minisink Munsee territory, which they claimed and sold, and that was not disputed. So there's some truth to what he's saying, and that there is this strip between the two rivers that was used by both, but it's only probably 10 miles across. Is that a good answer?
Yes, thank you. So that's the last question, and you're good to keep going.
Okay. So we go to 8:30. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let me see. That's good. Okay. So this is about that whole Wynkoop portage. You know, I kind of discovered it by studying the maps, you know, writing about Sandakan, but then I contacted the Time in the Valley Museum, Donna Steffens, and she had eyewitness accounts of settlers watching the natives go up and down that passage. So that was nice. You know, following these rivers and following the paths along the rivers seasonally. They find a lot of artifacts in that Chestnut Creek area. And now let's talk about the winter. So here's our poster. Now I just want to say, in my own defense here, in the previous talk, I talked about all these places in the Esopus and had villages in the summer. in what is now Phoenicia. So people lived here during the summer, had camped, but I talked about how the Munsee of all the areas for the winter lived before electricity. But it doesn't mean that they wintered in Phoenicia, because it's probable they didn't actually live in Phoenicia in the winter. So it's a cool looking poster, but I just want to say that you might consider that a typo. I don't know. But during the ice storm of February, I was without power, water, heat, and a phone and all these other things for 12 days, because when Central Hudson finally got to me, they turned on the electric and it blew all the circuits in the house. So I had no heater, water, all these other things for another 10 days, another 8 days. So several nights were below zero. In my area, looks like you guys had it easy. But I thought that was good research for my topic, but I couldn't get online to address those typos. I just went with it. But I want to go deeper into clarifying some subjects regarding winter and geography and so forth and so on. So you've heard about the mountain lions. And again, I think it was my friend Tom Foote who talking about the mountain lions. When it gets down to zero, they start showing up. That's interesting. So this is not actually my car, but it looks just like my car did back in early February. Now, one of the most memorable aphorisms of Northern Woodlands life for the winter, concerning winter, is preparation. Winter favors the well-prepared. And if you're not prepared, you might get through by thinking backwards. In other words, before E, you have to do D. Before D, you have to do C. Before C, you have to do B. Before B, you need to do A. And it might be that many steps. Usually try to start with A and think ahead. By the time you need E, you're ready. And that's true in almost any native lifestyle, where if you can't just say, oh, I'm hungry, I should have planted 6 months ago, right? Or I should have chopped some trees down 3 months ago and then dried them so I could have some firewood. But there are some things you can do, but there's no quick solutions or shortcuts using these earth-based technologies. So I want to tell you a personal story. When the ice storm hit, and I call this scratching, let's say, starting from scratch. I'll call this starting from scratch. When the ice storm hit, I was prepared for a regular storm, the kind I've been through before. The temperatures were about to hit zero for days, and the roads were blocked by big fallen trees. The National Guard came, but never got anywhere near me or my mountain. Central Hudson needed 4 days just to get to the house and more to restore the power. But a plow had buried all 3 of my firewood piles. An icy rain had turned the snow into vinyl. In other words, plastic, hard plastic. So I had emergency salt that I had bought, a big bag of it, but the salt bag was in the car, along with the snow boots I would need to dig out the firewood. You really needed snow boots. The car doors were unlocked because I thought ahead, but there was a 1/3 inch thick layer of ice sealing the doors shut, and my ice scraper was inside. So in order to get heat, I would have to step back. I went to the dark kitchen using a flashlight that I had. I found a spatula and I started attacking that driver door to the car like my life depended on it, because in fact it did. So I call this starting from scratch. After a half hour, I was able to pry open that door, and then I could turn on the engine, and then I could get the defroster going to help with thawing the other 3 doors and warm up sitting in the car. That was really nice. Then I got the salt bag from out of the back seat. I had to kind of pull it over the seats. And then I poured that over the 3 firewood piles. These are not huge piles. They're fairly shallow piles on a single pylon. Then a pallet. Then the sun came out. Wow. It was still really cold, but the sun came out, and I was able to then to shovel through the ice for the first time to pull off part of the tarpaulins that were covering the logs that were under the ice. Even the rays of the sun were helpful, even if it was cold. Then I got a sledgehammer, which I also had prepared. I guess I had to dig that out of the snow. Started whacking each individual log until the 1/3 ice coating that had glued them together was broken. Then I used salt and a shovel to create a flat chopping place near the porch. And then I split the logs, and then I brought them inside near the wood stove to try to get them warmer. And then I burned some of the logs, a few logs I'd saved from before that were dry. And I used that to dry some of the new logs. You see, it's a very long process. Then I was able to keep a fire going. which was the idea. Jack London had nothing on me. At the same time, I took some of the mini ice-coated branches that were strewn over the ground. I brought them inside to melt the ice off and try to dry them out, but it never would have worked if kindling. But eventually, after 3 days of drying them out, I could use them as in the fire, but they were so waterlogged, they just only burned if all the other, the fire was really big. So they didn't really help, that's how bad it was. But my car really did look like this. And I, after using the spatula, I was able to get my ice scraper out and scrape the windows and doors and whack at more of the doors. And I got them open and was able to use that. And the thing was, I actually got the car so that I, over time with the blower, that I could actually drive it. The problem was I couldn't drive anywhere because the roads were blocked with trees. So just so you know, that's a minor victory. Now, this isn't exactly how my house looked, but it kind of looked like that. While I was trying to find ways to stay warm in the house without power, heat, water, or phone, and it turned out to be 12 days on and off, and blocked in by felled trees, and facing 2 nights of zero temperatures, I was cornered into living a lifestyle much like the Munsee and how they must have lived during the wintertime in the Esopus Valley before European settlers. So I tried to take mental note of what worked and what didn't. For your benefit, my small wood stove was inadequate for comfort beyond 1 foot away. However, my cell phone miraculously kept going, not unlike the Hanukkah story of the Hebrews, not maybe that glorious, but my cell phone kept working without a charge. And the Algonquin cousin, not a direct family member, but, a close Algonquin friend, Kristen Van Fox, texted and encouraged me to make my house smaller. In other words, blocking them in the room around the wood stove. Now, people have told me that before, but I didn't really want to do that because that would create some other problems. But I did it. I boarded up the windows and I closed most of the doors. But then that required me to sleep in front of the wood stove because, once the bedroom's been closed off, you wouldn't want to be in there. I kept the kitchen open and saved my pipes from freezing that way. During the rearranging effort, a passage from James Howard's books, The Shawnee, popped into my mind. The winter house had a circular floor plan and a domed roof. It was also smaller in size than the summer house and hence easier to heat. That's page 76. That sentence popped into my head while lying in the dark in front of my fireplace. I had always wondered why a migratory nation would go through such trouble to build 2 houses. And suddenly I understood. It was much easier to heat a small house than a large one. So my Micmac people, we had cold temperatures most of the time, and we lived in wigwams most of the time. Very small, and less emphasis on longhouses. I don't think we ever used longhouses. But to make a long story short, as soon as I closed in the warm pool room, 2 things happened immediately. One was that the 1 foot radius of warmth around the fire suddenly expanded to at least 4 feet. Another was that the cross drafts caused by the varying temperatures in different parts of the house that had been blowing out the fire, those crosswinds disappeared and the fire became stable and did not suffer that same instability. Now, I didn't really realize that because when you're outside, you don't have that same instability. You have wind and you can block the prevailing wind. But I didn't realize how you can't really feel them, but there are drafts in the house that were blowing out the fire. So again, this photo here is not my house, but it felt like that. Now, remember, I just remembered this passage in the book about the Shawnee, but I think that the Shawnee were preserving some wintering secrets of the early Munsee Delaware, who called them their grandfathers. Now, this is from Kathy Alexander, which is more of an internet writer. During the summer, the Shawnee gathered in villages of bark-covered longhouses, with each village having a large council house for meeting and religious ceremonies. They separated into small hunting camps of extended families and lived in wigwams in the fall. Read winter, okay, meaning going out in hunting camps and living in wigwams in the winter. Men were warriors and did the hunting and fishing. The women responsible for farming, gathering nuts, fruits, and edible roots. That's Kathy Alexander. Okay, that's the source. Okay, but really, I'm looking beyond this and I'm seeing something I never noticed before. It corresponds with a more detailed account in James Howard's authoritative book, The Shawnee, the Ceremonialism of a Native American Tribe and its Cultural Background. And page 75 through 80, and I do recommend the book, there's a whole section about this. There seems to be plenty of evidence that Munsee used a similar survival strategy, and perhaps even the same one, but it was never clearly described by Europeans in any book I've ever read. But this book describes it very clearly. And you do hear about the Shawnee having a winter house and a summer house. Well, there's evidence that Lenape did the same. This is also from that. The early day Shawnee had two principal types of dwellings, one for summer and one for winter, a practice still followed by their ultra-conservative neighbors and their kinsmen, the Kickapoo. And by the way, those are two very closely related. They pretty much speak the same language. Of the two types, the summer house survived longer among the Shawnee, still remembered by some of the absentee Shawnee informants. That's in Oklahoma. The winter house had been replaced by the Scandinavian-derived log cabin by the end of the 18th century. Today, the log cabin has come to be thought of as the old-time Indian winter dwelling by older Shawnees. And Mary Spoon, who's one of a handful of really great Shawnee writers, described the celestial home of Tecumseh, the grandmother, she is the #1 deity, the Shawnee female deity, as living in a log cabin. And that's also been my association with the Shawnee. I often think of them as preferring log cabins, but apparently that's obviously not the original kind of dwelling, but you can see this migration. And here's a winter, that's a Shawnee wigwam here. And that would be in the winter. But this is a Shawnee village in the summer, and it's very stylized. But you can see the longhouse. Now, the Lenape or the Munsee people did certainly have longhouses, but they couldn't have heated them very well in the winter. So they probably only lived them in the summer, and then in the winter went to these small houses. In the central villages with the longhouse, they would have ceremony and feasting, but in the winter they'd go out and scatter the wigwams among the woods and the trees to be near the game and to have a small house easier to warm. At Wiltmeet, which is now Marbletown, which is actually along the that trail, there was a longhouse 100 feet long, and this has been recorded by archaeologists. Even though most of the natives lived in wigwams scattered among the trees in random pattern, which we saw at a Knox Mansion site near Newburgh. There's colonial descriptions of these wigwams scattered randomly. A longhouse of that size could not be heated in winter, so it seemed logical the local Munsee, called the grandfathers by the Shawnee, must have used the same seasonal settlement pattern as preserved to this day by the absentee Shawnee of Oklahoma. In summer, they would gather close together in the longhouse for agricultural purposes, which they need teams of people together to do agriculture, and for tribal ceremony. But then in winter, they needed to hunt. And so they need to be near the game. So they'd build these wigwams, and the Shawnee called them a witu, which is easily heated and close to the game. So this is a Sac and Fox stick house, which is similar in some ways to a Shawnee house. And this is a Munsee or Lenape, Oklahoma type of house, a ceremonial house. So it's kind of a cross. So this is some of the cooking. These pestles were found near Nyack, but they're thousands of years old, so they wouldn't be related to the Nyack who were originally for Brooklyn. But this is cooking outside, look at all season kind of thing. So this is more of a repeat from last time, but to go over this, because again, last time I didn't really spend a lot of time on it, but some food has more calories and creates more heat. Pemmican is good in the winter, made from mulberries and deer meat, which have a chemical reaction between them to preserve it. This is, the original health food is cambium, vitamin C, vitamins and minerals. So you have the bark, but underneath the bark is the cambium layer. They actually would eat that. You can harvest that cambium layer from a tree, particularly a pine tree, and eat it raw by peeling off the first layer. You can eat it raw or make bread out of the cambium of aspen, birch, willow, maple, and pine. But again, it'd be good to be careful. You know, there are just a few species you really can't eat. See if you can digest it. And so you can lick the sap or gum or resin as it comes out and shred the rest and chew it, or cut it into strips and chew it hard. You can boil it like noodles, or even add it to noodles to increase the volume. It can thicken soups like cornstarch. So I've never done it, but I'll put it under, like I say, Native American beliefs, because I believe they did this. So let me go. This is one of my favorite dishes, is these green shoots. Early spring, not a lot to eat, nothing like delicious spruce tips to brighten your day. Very addictive and sweet. Many evergreens have edible tips, but do not eat the yew tips from the yew trees. Try to learn the poisonous species. Shandaken literally means the place of spruce. So you can find lots of these choice spruce tips if you look, and they are amazing. Hemlock tips are troublesome and currently suffer from hemlock tip blight, a whitish paste, not worth your time. Spruce tip is a new spring growth at the end of a branch. You see how these are so green. The tree hunkers down for the winter, but in the spring they have these tender and flavorful new growths and can vary from tree to tree. Okay, so my great aunt Helen, one of my Micmac mentors, my actual great aunt, made pine needle tea in winter and said it would have more vitamin C than a handful of pills, and she never went to hospital till 90. And we wrote Aunt Helen's herb book together. I wanted to mention, I haven't shown you this before, but this is about making pemmican, because pemmican is winter food. But in mid-June, the red mulberries ripen. That's like here in that bowl. And fawns come out too. That's not a fawn, obviously a buck. A village could have a camp of pemmican makers set up away from the village, beating the deer meat together with the mulberries or chokecherries, these are the chokecherries, as a substitute, into a paste that would never spoil because of the chemical reaction. And it would keep the hunters strong in the long winter trips. And it was very popular with both the Haudenosaunee and the Algonquins of this area. And the cakes would also become trade items and be spread for hundreds of miles around by the first of winter. So that's something very important to know about winter. And this is, I showed you this last time, so I'll only touch upon it. Ice hole fishing is still a very viable tradition among natives, especially in Canada. And there's various different kinds of ways to use these harpoons, basically. These go back 7,500 years, and red paint people of Labrador had harpoons by that date. And this is a straight spear that's kind of harder, but I talked about that last time. So okay, and the snowshoes, I was very surprised how they're used most of the time. Joe Bruchak talked to me about snowshoes, wore them most of his life, and was able to run in them on top of snow, no matter how deep. That means possibly shallow. Some people don't like to snowshoe in shallow snow. He said they never use snow shovels, but would rather walk on top of the drifts. If snow did need to be moved, they would use large pieces of elm bark to become hard after they dried for a few days. By the way, the Shawnee used elm bark the same way as the Munsee did. They run winter survival classes in Greenfield. And again, I think I read this one, the snowshoe, which is necessary in winter as the canoe is in summer. Throughout the whole of North America, travelers, traders, and churchgoers would move about in snowshoes. And here's another example. And she's wearing a toque, which a lot of natives in Canada still wear these toques. That's what they're called. And there was one in the Christmas Story, if you saw that TV special, the brother wears the toque. So this is George Caitlin's picture of snowshoe dancing in the winter, and they obviously look very comfortable. My Aunt Helen said they got the idea from watching snowshoe rabbits run through the snow. So she had part of the oral tradition through her father and grandfather, I guess. And so, I think that's at least a legitimate story, like an oral tradition, but it may be actually true. They look at the snowshoe rabbits and get ideas, having big feet and working better, traveling better. And snow snake, I talked about that last time. Of the travois, or the dog sled, or drag sled. You just have two poles with sharp points on the end of each, so they'll slide, harnessed to a dog. They wouldn't overburden the dog, of course, because you wanted the dog to be your friend. It's most effective in the winter as there's less friction, and the dog handler might be wearing snowshoes. And sometimes humans would harness the sleds to themselves. And you see today modern travelers around the airport hauling around their suitcases on wheels. You see that that's like the modern equivalent. But I know these were used until fairly recently. Staying dry, you know, you've heard this before, wet clothes is really not good. And that, for me, the finding the snow boots in the car was very important, not just because the snow was very deep around the firewood, but because that particular boot was well insulated and my feet weren't getting wet. Whereas in some of my other shoes, my feet were getting wet, and I just couldn't have that because it could really be very dangerous. So getting the boots really helped with that, not getting hypothermia. And again, there's a tribe called the Sanikan, which means to use the fire bow. So this is a bow. It's just basically a stick that you bend with the rope around this. It's kind of hard to set this up. You got to practice it. Then you put your foot on this board, and then you push and pull with the bow. It spins the rod. And also there's lubricant up here. Like you can use a green leaf in the hole in the holder to allow it to rotate easier. And this is where your friction is. And so there's certain kind of, this is very important. You have this nest. Here is the nest. There's only a few types of plants or weeds that really work well for a nest: dogbane, milkweed, stinging nettle, fireweed, and cattail, and horseweed, if you can get that. So these work better. If you're using the wrong thing, you may be very frustrated. And you can use a pocket knife to shred most of these plants. I did that again. I had a pocket knife during my little ordeal there, but basically 48 hours of near zero temperatures in my house. But I used experimented with the pocket knife, and some wood shreds easier than others. A bamboo pole can be easily shredded to make a nest. Inner tree bark is good, and good outer barks include birch, cedar, and juniper, especially, of course, the cedar. You can just pull them off the tree and then let them dry. And then you have to create a coal to ignite it. But, you know, cedar always just lights right up. To get small pine wood board like this one and carve this inverted cone on it with the pocket knife, but then it has a channel for the ashes or embers to fall out. I'm going to skip this. So you may remember, this is pretty simple. There's a lot of different kind of fur caps that keep you really warm. Leggings, these are slip-on, called gauntlet fur leggings. And these are leggings of a different kind. These are not gauntlet, these are full pants. And you don't really see gloves. That's a typo. I meant to change it. You have mittens, not gloves. And so I'll show you, but these are the gauntlet. They slip on and keep your ankles warm, but these are the full leggings, and these are the high boots, buckskin leggings. But there's, again, gloves is not the right word. These are mittens and one thumb, and they really keep your hands warm, but you can't type or play guitar. Okay. But anyway, you see, this is clockwise: beaver fur, coyote fur, rabbit fur, which they say is the warmest, and moose fur, which is very waterproof. But the rabbit fur is said, according to my research on it, talking to the people, reading colonial records, rabbit fur is the warmest of all the furs. Now, this is a buckskin jacket, is a very warm kind of jacket. It has hair stem. And then this is the buckskin jacket with fringe. This is the Ojibwe star quilt. And this is a shawl or poncho. And there's different kind of shawls. So all keeping you warm here. Seeking shelter. This is, I think, an excellent photograph of a Native American's kind of igloo, the kind that Algonquins make, not the kind in cartoons, but a big pile of snow, and then let's see, and then the blanket was sometimes used as a door, but you tunnel in from the side in a big pile of snow. And when you're inside, the body generates enough heat and warmth to warm the inside of the igloo. But again, some call it igloo, but they know that's not really the same thing. My grandfather did this several times, as did his father before him, when blizzards would blow up unexpectedly while hunting in northern Maine. And then they also call them igloos, but they really would call them snow shelters. And there's other names for them. Now, the wigwams in the lower left, this one might be suitable for winter, but New England wigwams were the best. They were double walled with like elm bark flattened out, but they were double walled with incredible insulation. Scientists have determined these structures are as well insulated as any in the world. So having a warm heart, of course, helps a lot to get through cold weather. Time of year for storytelling. Many of the stories were wise stories, how the chipmunks got its stripes, how the birds got their songs, and creation stories. And most have a moral at the end, but it's left to the narrator to discuss the moral with the audience and not just laid out like a lecture. A medicine story often has an ethical dilemma, and some of these dilemmas are quite complicated. So the listeners have to come to a conclusion who in the story was right and wrong and why, and what to do about it. And the problem might be one similar to what the tribe or the family is going through. And there's, of course, other topics, maple sugaring. I have a whole presentation on that, but basically, you know, there's you can actually do that. You can have a water bucket made of kind of a birch bark, and you can have a log that's hollowed out to hold the sap as well, and you drop a hot rock in it over and over again, you know, to get the maple sugar. And you get it, you tap the trees, you know, with sumac, a sumac branch that's hollowed out, and you cut part of that. So now I'm going to stop for just a bit. We've got, oh, it's about that time. I haven't shown my story, but maybe we can show the bear story. But let's maybe stop for more questions for a moment.
We don't have any questions in the chat, so if you want to keep going, or we can end the recording and go to just chatting. So it's up to you. Do you want to spend?
Yeah,
tell the
yeah, I
story?
have a little story.
Okay.
What I'll do is
That'd be great.
Oh, okay, we go there, we go here. So I'll jump to part of the way through the story. Okay, so the bear sees her star rising. You know, this is a variation on the woodchuck sees the shadow, right? So let's go to slideshow. Okay, so this time of year in the winter, the Big Dipper rotates counterclockwise. I mean, all year it rotates counterclockwise around the polar star. But this time of year, it starts to get like this straight up, like the bear that's rearing and threatening, and then it falls down over top of the pole star, way up in the sky, and it's like lying on its back, so to speak. So there's stories they tell. So here we have, let's see, there's a couple of days. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but you can go back at the recording later. But January 31st this year was the dark of the moon, and we had more than 10 hours of daylight, because the day was from 7:10 a.m. till 5:11 p.m., which is one more minute than 10 hours of light, which means that's the real light return that everybody's waiting for. Before that day, a lot of seeds won't germinate, and snow will not tend to melt easily because the sun's rays are too low, and nursing ewes will give milk. And so that this year we had more than 10 hours by a minute. Here's the ewes giving milk. Here's a lot of plants start to germinate, and they angle the sun. And here the poor snowman is melting. So anyway, this you can look at later, but these are some of the, like the alliums, really benefit by 10 hours of light. Carrots and beets, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, lettuces, spinach, and mustard, all our favorites, kale and collards, all benefit if you know how to do that, growing at the right time. And here's also, this is about the time, January 31st, when all true bears in the Northern Hemisphere are born, I believe all over the world, which I call the baby bear birthday. And it's the day that I honor Wabi-Mawinu-Atnuk, who is the great white bear of the north, not the polar bear, but the spiritual bear of white light that protect us around the globe. And January 31st, notice that chickadees changed their song. So they'd been twittering aimlessly, and in my yard too. But then they started singing this decisive pair of notes. And then around Valentine's Day, interestingly enough, they changed their song to Hi, Sweetie, on Valentine's Day. That's how you remember it's Valentine's. And February 1st is new moon in the Chinese year. The water tiger for them in China, Korea, and Mongolia. And the male bear emerges from the cave while the mate's nursing the babies in hibernation. And he looks for his shadow. But it's, it's the same really as the groundhog you see here. Sorry about that. So woodchuck is an Algonquin word for a groundhog. Woodchuck, and grandmother woodchuck is Nugami. And she trains Glooskap as he's growing up. And 2/2 was Groundhog's Day. And notice in the original story, the Virgin Mary goes into the temple and presents the baby and holds him up for blessing. And it's interesting that this tradition is still carried on by holding the groundhog up in the air on the same day, February 2nd, which is Candlemas. Punxsutawney Phil, a prophet of his own kind. Okay, the word ponkies is Lenape word for biting bugs. And they were migrating west, and at this point they come to Punxsutawney, which wasn't called that, but they went to the cedar swamp, and there was a wizard who tried to stop them and did battle, turned himself into a swarm of biting bugs. And this is where the Canadian bear tradition became the American woodchuck tradition. Now, it's very interesting. Look at this map of Punxsutawney. The town is at the crossroads of two old trails, Mahoning Street, which is 36 going east-west here, and 119, that's a typo, both following the Mahoning Creek here, you see. And Mahoning, Mahu is bear, and Ing is place. So it's the place of the Bear Creek. The N probably short for when from a certain place. So the bear from a certain place. And Mahopu in Muncie means to pick berries like a bear. And over here, you see the bear's shadow. In North Carolina, it happens this time of year, the mountain casts a bear's shadow. Just coincidental. Because there is a kind of cedar swamp that you'd find in Pennsylvania, and biting bugs are known to live there. You can imagine the story might be true. And on Thursday, the 3rd this year, was midwinter, and halfway between winter solstice and spring equinox. And it is the first crescent moon this year, and therefore Losar, Tibetan New Year, you're the water tiger. The Tibetans go on for 3 days, and the Dalai Lama consults the Nichiren oracle about the future, just like the bear and the woodchuck do. They also perform rituals of gratitude at a sacred spring, because it's probably just melting. So here he's consulting with this man whose uniform is about 80 pounds, I think, and he tells the future. Now here's this time of year, February, the Big Dipper goes on its back, and the bear goes on its back, and we're going to see why. But also it spills down according to lore with the water. So the bear has just been slain, but no part will be thrown away, including the bear grease. His spirit will rise up to his cave. Now let me show you how this story goes. Okay, the bear sees her star rising. Now here's all the main characters. And they're all representing stars. And this is as told by Tully Paul, Tully Paul is a Micmac elder. Early missionaries and travelers in what's now Canada were surprised when they learned that the Indians also knew the bear stars, the constellations they themselves called the Great Bear, Ursa Major, called the Great Dipper also. And the following myth was related by the Algonquins and the Iroquois tribes, but this is the Micmac version, or Mi'kmaq. In their story, the bear is represented only by the 4 stars at the bowl of the Big Dipper. The 3 stars that we imagine to be the handle of the dipper or the tail of the bear, that is, in this myth, the first 3 of the 7 hunters pursuing the bear. Now, you know, bears don't really have long tails, so that never made sense. I know a lot of kids would say, wait a minute, bears don't have long tails. So shut up, kid. The hunters are, first of all, robin, because the star is reddish in color. And the second hunter in the tail is chickadee, because it's small. And the third is the moose bird at the very end of what we think of the handle. And then you've got pigeon and blue jay, which is a blue star that's past the handle, and then 2 owls. Now the moose bird, which is at the end of the handle, is the Canadian jay. Tends to be black and white, like this guy. The tiny star beside chickadee is the pot that he's carrying. When the bear is killed, he will cook the meat and put it in the pot. Just above the hunters, a group of smaller stars forms the bear's den. The myth explains the position of the stars in the constellations in different seasons, and apparently includes the constellations Bootes and Corona Borealis. So here's the 2 owls. I mean, I took these from other sources. This is the blue jay, robin, chickadee, the pigeon, and of course the bear. The bear is represented by 4 stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper, and that's just these 4 here. We do not include these at all. Of the 3 stars we imagine to be the handle of the dipper, which is boom, boom, this one, boom, boom, boom. This is Elliot, Alcor, and its twin star, Mizar. Alcor is the smaller one, and Alcade. Okay. The 3 center, the hunters are robin, chickadee, and the others. Megrez is the robin, Alcor and Mizar the chickadee in his pot. Alcade is therefore the moose bird. However, this means that the rightmost star in Bootes is the pigeon, while blue jay is the bright one on the left side of Bootes. So you see you have Bootes here. There's Arcturus, it's not part of the story. Alphecca, that one bright star. So you have several more hunters. Okay, blue jay is the bright one on the left side of Bootes. The upper left star in Bootes is a small owl. And then you've got the bright star in Corona B is the larger owl. Mizar is the large blue star, while Alcor is the binary companion, the smaller star here. Alcor is the chickadee's pot in this story, but in other stories, Alcor is a little dog, a little hunting dog. Anywhere you have the whole picture here of the main characters, but also there's more beyond here who are hunters. And it's interesting because, of course, they're going to get lost behind the horizon when the bear stands up. These are the tail stars. Again, the most important is the bear here, and then Megrez is part of that bear, and then Alioth, the robin, and then Mizar really is the chickadee, and then Alcade is this, the moose bird. Okay, the 7 begin the chase after placing chickadee in his pot between the 2 other larger birds. So that's him here, he's smaller. So he'll not lose his way. They all pursue the bear eagerly, being hungry for meat after the long winter. So they're all going this way. These 2 stars in Bootes and Corona Borealis are the 2 owls. Other stars in the constellations are hard to see with the naked eye, so they're not included. The bright star in Corona is Alphecca, which is this guy, and the smaller star is called the Acadian owl in the story, and that would be over here. And here's the blue jay, and here's the pigeon. Okay, so the storyteller in winter can go on and tell all these stories and really draw them out and point to the stars and say, look, there they are. So we just, in other words, use the main part of the dipper and not the extended to the east, but we use the tail. But more than that, that's just 3 of the hunters. There's more to the story. Okay, just above the hunters, a group of smaller stores forms the bear's den. Again, this is from, this version that was printed out in a reservation magazine that was, anyway, I'll go on. The bear's den is a cluster of stars over the bear's head. As our bear's head is at Dubé, this would mean that M81 and 82 are the den and other stars close to Draco's head. So here's the end of Draco. Here's some stars, but here's M82. And you notice it's cigar shaped. Like when you look at the opening of a bear's den, it actually is kind of a shallow crescent. They're considered part of the Ursa Major asterism. M82 is a cigar galaxy, as it's been called, has long horizontal oval shape, just like the mouth of a bear's cave. And as you see, it's filled with light. So here's a picture. I didn't take this picture myself, but this is the bear's cave. You see, but the bear's cave is filled with celestial light, which is exactly what you would expect from the den of a celestial bear, a very sacred bear. And here's the bear energy coming out and kind of standing up in front of this den. You see that? So this is like the edge of the earth, and these are the rocks. And the bear has dug out, has hollowed his little bear's den opening. It's horizontal, and this is in September. You see it's down below pole star Polaris here, and then it swings around, travels counterclockwise around Polaris, and it's standing upright again. The Tule owls are going to disappear, and then pigeon and blue jay will disappear. Are they running away in fear? But you see they're below the horizon because they'll be standing right on the end there. Late in spring, the bear wakes from her long sleep, leaves her den, and descends to the ground in search of food. And sharp-eyed chickadee sees her instantly. He is too small to pursue her himself, and he calls the other hunters out. So here we have, you see Ursa Major right near the horizon and that low winter position. And then the bear is shot by hunters in the fall and sinks over the horizon, and the blood spills all over the mountains and trees, turning them red. And then the bear stands upright and rises again. Hunters still pursuing her. Throughout the summer, the bear flees across the northern horizon, still pursued by the hunters. In the autumn, those in their rear lose the trail and they drop out one by one. The first deers appear from the chase of the two owls, because they're heavier and clumsier than the other birds. Well, obviously, they're also at the very end, far out beyond the tip of the tail. And so when it stands on its end, they're going to be disappearing behind the horizon. And you see an Arcturus way down here now. These are called the straggling four hunters, by the way, the heavy and clumsier owls. We also know that they're further from Polaris, so they're going to go below the horizon at one point. Robin, Alioth, is a red giant and is the brightest star in Ursa Major and one of the brightest stars in the sky. So it's very brave, Robin. And then the account that's from our original source. You must not laugh when you learn the smaller owl, the Acadian owl, which was, by the way, that's a Micmac owl, a territorial owl from our area, has failed to get some of the bear meat. You must not imitate his rasping cry. And if you do, he will descend from the sky when you're asleep with his birch bark torch, and he will set fire to whatever clothing you are wearing. Well, there's a stern warning, scare the crap out of kids. But here is, I believe that's a comet. And so it's a picture of a comet. So this is Tully Paul, by the way, who tells the story, and he's very knowledgeable. After the owls, the blue jay and pigeon lose their way and drop out of the chase. In other words, they're behind the horizon. You see this diagram? This is what the dipper does in this time of year, February and January. And those other birds are way behind the horizon here. You can't see it. Only robin, chickadee, and moose bird are left. And they continue their pursuit, and at last, about the middle, some point, they overtake the bear, and so the bear stands up to defend herself. Brought to bay, the bear rises up on her hind feet, prepares to defend herself, but Robin pierces her with his arrow. So this is actually, I didn't draw this either, but here you happen to have a robin, brave Sir Robin, shooting an arrow. That's probably where all that comes from, shooting towards the bear. The position of the Big Dipper at this position, and blue jay, pigeon, and the two owls would be below the horizon, obviously. And here's Arcturus way down there. And here's the bear, falls over on her back because she had been shot. Note the straggler hunters that were below the horizon when Robin shot the bear are now fully visible. They show him just in time for dinner, which is the reputation that the moose bird has. Whenever you kill the moose, suddenly the moose bird shows up to eat. And that's actually true. That particular species will do that and wait till humans have killed the bear and then come and feed on it. Well, and then it swings all the way around, maybe this time of year too, and maybe beginning of March, the Big Dipper swings around and now it's upside down. And this is also after the bear is hunted. Some people will hang the bear upside down, sort of like that tarot card, of the fool. They render the bear's meat by draining the blood. They tie the bear up and use a strong tree branch with pulleys and ropes to lift the bear in the air so the blood runs out, and also gives them easier access to the meat. The bear's pretty heavy. By April, the celestial bear is usually in this upside down position to the left of Polaris. And that time, the bear's spirit leaves and goes to the bear's den in the cigar galaxy and is reborn as a bear cub, starting the whole thing over. Now let's go back to the bleeding part, very important part of the story. In all versions of the story, Robin is thin and Autumn hasn't had enough to eat and is eager to hunt the bear and get some of that bear fat. In his haste, he leaps upon her and becomes covered with blood. Flying to the closest maple tree in the land of the sky, he tries to shake off the blood, but he succeeds in getting all of it off except a spot on his breast. Haha, look right there. There it is. So you know it's true. That spot, says Chickadee, you will carry as long as your name is Robin. Well, that's a little judgmental. We tried not to do that, but the story is trying to have a moral here. But the blood that he does shake off spatters far and wide over the forests of the earth. And so every autumn we see the blood red tints of this foliage. And reddest of all are the maple leaves, for trees on the earth follow the appearance of the trees in the sky. And the maples up there receive the most blood. The sky, is just the same as earth, except that it's up there and it's older. So you see these look like drops of blood on the maple trees. And of course, blood everywhere. So this is the result of the hunt. Sometime after the robin kills the bear, Chickadee arrives on the scene, and together they cut up the body, they build a fire and place some of the meat in Chickadee's pot to cook it. Just as they are about to eat, Moose Bird arrives. He almost lost the trail, but when he found it again, he did not hurry. He knew that we would take his companions some time to slay the bear, to cook the meat. He didn't mind missing the work. He arrived in time for his full share of the food. Indeed, he was so impressed by this practice the first time. He never again hunted for himself. He prefers to follow the hunters in their share of their spoils. Today, when a bear or moose of other animal is killed in the woods of the Micmac territory, you'll see the moose bird appear at the last minute to demand his share. And that is why the other birds have named him he who comes in at the last moment. And probably some human beings who should have that name. So here's some meat, maybe not bear, but cooking over a fire. And this is an actual photo of an actual moose bird eating some meat that's been hunted. And Robin and Chickadee, being generous, do share their food with Moose Bird, and they do it willingly. Before they eat, Chickadee stirs the meat in the pot. The others dance around the fire. Such was the custom in the good old days when the Mi'kmaq were brothers to all. Then they felt it their duty to share their food together, to thank each other, and to thank the universal spirit for their happiness. So here's a picture of some native people in a bird dress doing ceremonial dancing. Now, throughout the winter, the skeleton of the bear lies on its back in the sky, but her life spirit has entered another bear that lies on her back in the den, invisible, sleeping the long sleep of winter. And when spring comes around, this bear will again leave her den and will be pursued by the hunters. She too will be slain, but will send her life spirit to the den again, from which she will come forth yet again when the sun once more awakens the sleeping earth. So this is like an endless cycle, an endless story that goes on and on and on throughout all eternity. Life and death, birth and death, hunting, eating. And Joseph Campbell called this the eternal return. It's a feature of stories from all over the world. So every year the hunters pursue and capture the bear. And night after night, we tell this story beside our campfires as we watch the great bear in the sky. And that's my story. So it's 9 o'clock, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how I found that story kind of miraculously. It is a Micmac version of the story. So I was at a rally of Micmac people. I don't know if you can see this. Okay, I'm trying to find. Okay. I just want to tell you a quick story about how I came across this story, because it's actually a good story. That in the year 2000, I was a little younger then, but I was singing at a Micmac gathering of over 1,000 Micmacs with my sister and a friend. And Tully Paul was one of the organizers. And he asked me, he showed me this magazine that they're publishing on their reservation. And he asked me to write an article. And so I did. I submitted the article, and then they published that. And later on, I got a copy of this magazine in the mail here in the States. And I read most of it, but for some reason, I didn't read Tully's article. It was on the inside back cover, and I guess I missed it. But that was the article to read. And I put it away in my filing system, which I call my piling system. And just recently, I found it 22 years later. And that was the story I needed. I needed a bear story about the Big Dipper. And I had been asked to speak at Colgate University to inaugurate their planetarium with a story from the Indians. And there it was. And it was, I think, a really great story. So it took some time to try to figure out what stars were which. And I think I'm fairly confident about that. So I'm looking forward to Colgate University, but I'm happy to share it with you, because you can imagine, being out in winter by your campfire and the old storytellers telling you this whole long story about all these characters and pointing to them in the sky and showing you the stars. So it gives you a little taste of what life was like thousands of years ago. I would say this story is 3,000 years old. That's my guess based on some of the characteristics. A little touch of eternity there.
Thank you. That was a wonderful story. We've got one question I'm gonna read, and then I'm gonna turn off the recording and open it up for discussion for about 20 minutes.
Okay.
The question comes from Janet, and she said, where can we find the best collection of Munsee, Lenape, Haudenosaunee artifacts and tools? How about the Albany Museum, the Iroquois Museum? Thank you so much. This was a fabulous lecture, and we appreciate your knowledge.
Oh, for tools. Well, the Iroquois Museum is the best, I think, for Iroquois tools. And I think the State Museum in Albany has probably the best collection of Munsee tools. But also in Millbrook, is it Millbrook or Milford, Pennsylvania, that's on the Delaware? Anybody? I want to make sure I got the right name. I get those two confused. Milford has a museum called the Columns, and in the attic they've got some remarkable Munsee, Delaware artifacts up there, and they're trying to become better known, but they're not all that well known because they were closed for a while. But there are some good examples there of the Munsee or Lenape tools. But yeah, the Iroquois Museum is the best. They're very, very organized, and they have, Iroquois artifacts.
I'm gonna ask you to stop sharing your screen, and then I'm gonna open up. Just people can talk for about 20 minutes. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me. And I'm going to stop the recording.